for America in his second State of the Union address. The speech was originally scheduled for last month, but was postponed because of the partial government shutdown. Despite ongoing fights on several fronts, Donald Trump is expected to call for all sides to work together. NBC News' Tracy Potts has more.
The President of the United States.
Tonight, President Trump lays out his agenda for the first time before a divided Congress.
He's calling for cooperation, and he's calling for comity, C-O-M-I-T-Y, and also compromise.
The White House says the theme for tonight's speech is choosing greatness, focusing on immigration, trade, infrastructure, lowering health costs, and foreign policy. The president's expected to point out economic success and areas where opposing parties can work together. Democrats are skeptical.
Who knows what he'll come out with? And who knows what he'll say the day after he comes out with it.
His audience includes 2020 presidential opponents, critics of his pullout in Syria and Afghanistan, and lawmakers who want him impeached. It comes amid negotiations to avoid another government shutdown next week, hung up over the president's demand to build a border wall.
He's got to say, I'm willing to meet you someplace that will demonstrate that we are working together to secure the border of America.
Working together, the goal, but so far, not reality. Tracy Potts, NBC News, Washington.
Well, joining me now to look ahead from Washington, D.C. is Chris Garcia, a former Deputy Director of the U.S. Department of Commerce. Thanks for talking to us on Euronews now. What are you expecting Donald Trump to say tonight?
Yeah, tonight's going to be a very interesting State of the Union. Again, this is the first time the president, I would say, begins his campaign for 2020. What we're looking at is a couple of major topics the president has been talking about and has tried to get deals done for, the first of which, of course, is the border wall. The president campaigned in 2016 on building a border wall south of the United States, between the United States and Mexico. And he knows now that with the divided Congress, Democrats in control of the House, Republicans in control of the Senate, he's got to find something to give in order to get that border wall concession. I expect that there will be some immigration reform discussion, some type of a proposal from the president. And there's also going to be a discussion about working together with Democrats to talk about infrastructure, rebuilding the nation's infrastructure, the crumbling infrastructure, as President Trump calls it. And then, of course, there's also the topics of ratifying the USMCA trade deal, the newly negotiated NAFTA 2.0, as some call it. There's also going to be a discussion about lowering prescription and healthcare costs, needing to end costly foreign wars. Again, this is something the president has campaigned on. So expect this to be the first day, as some might assume this would be, the first day that President Trump begins his campaign for 2020.
Well, we know in his last speech, he gave that marathon talk for just over an hour and 20 minutes, I think the second longest in history. How significant is this State of the Union address?
This is a significant State of the Union address. This is his second ever. Of course, the previous year, you had critics on on the other side of the aisle who said that the president's speech was divisive. Some might say that from an objective lens, it was more of a unifying speech. This is a speech tonight that we're going to see the president project a more unifying tone. At least that's what the White House is saying. Again, we're going to see the visuals a little bit differently. Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who is now the Speaker of the House leading the Democrats, is going to be seated behind the president. Expect her not to rise and clap for many President Trump's applause lines. But on the other side, you'll see Vice President Pence, and you'll see the visuals show that there's going to be, as much as President Trump would like to have a unified Congress, as much as he'd like to have a pro-America Congress, you're going to see Democrats seated at many of President Trump's standing ovation remarks, whereas Republicans will rise and clap. This is a time, however, that the president will need to unify the country. Even with the economy doing so well, unemployment numbers being at all-time lows in many respects, certainly for minority Americans and women Americans, the president is still significantly receiving, I would say, disproportionate negative news coverage. And so he'll have to overcome that somehow. And I think the way he does that is through a unifying message.
Now, you've stressed that this message is about unifying, but, and also that he's got an eye also on the 2020 election campaign. But how much of it is really, how much are people going to, believe what he's saying, given what's happened in the last 2 years?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to run on. The president has accomplished several major feats in his first 2 years. The first was, of course, deregulation and the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which has led to, more than 4% GDP growth, which was said under a previous administration could never be achieved. We have more Americans working today than at any point in history in the United States. We have minority Americans, Hispanic Americans, and African Americans. As I mentioned earlier, women Americans having all-time low unemployment rates. We're seeing the stock market hit all-time highs. So there are significant accomplishments that the president can run on, and so those are the things he's going to need to emphasize, because with a strong and robust economy, that's the underpinning. That is really the foundation for a strong and prosperous union. So the State of the Union the president will say tonight is strong. I think that the theme moving forward is that he needs to make the case to voters and to Congress that the way forward to American greatness is a continuation of those policies, not a switch up, not a change in the administration. And that's going to be the case to make.
Well, we'll be following this story with interest. Chris Garcia, former Deputy Director of the U.S. Department of Commerce, thanks for joining us on Euronews Now.